Welcome back to Bexhill West. I'm James. Thank you for joining me. Well, it's a mixed bag today with lots going on, so we'll get straight into it. Now, many of you may recall that quite some time ago now I started to think about the turntable for Bexhill West, and there are no decent photographs of the turntable available, and I didn't really have much to go on, but I did know it was a Ransoms and Rapier type of turntable, and so I did a little bit of digging around, and it turned out that just down the road from me at Robertsbridge Junction, the Rother Valley Railway have acquired such a turntable. And if you can recall the story back where it began, very kindly, with their help, I got hold of the drawings for the thing, and I've been drawing it up. In fact, the plan is to make a model for Bexhill West, and also one that the Rother Valley Railway can have in their sort of visitor centre. Anyway, here's the locking mechanism. I drew all the parts up based on the drawings for the castings, and was really quite surprised to see it all worked a treat. And it was quite an educational experience for me, learning how it all worked. Anyway, the day arrived yesterday, it was the 11th of March, where their newly refurbished turntable bridge could be lifted into position. So we'll have a little look at some of that footage now. Now, I was very fortunate here in that my employer gave me the day off work to go and see this, so thank you to them. Anyway, I think you can probably gauge the order of proceedings here. I showed the turntable bridge last summer, I think it was, and it was all refurbished and had been loaded onto a bogie bolster wagon, and it's been sat there for some time whilst they've been preparing the groundworks to receive it. And so, as I say, yesterday was the day when the lift took place. Now, the lift itself happened really quite quickly. This is all in real time, and you can see how quick and straightforward it was to remove from the wagon. I must add here that quite a lot of prep work had been done in terms of preparing the crane, the rigging and everything else, making sure it was safe and people were well out the way, etc, etc. But you can see just how impressive that thing is. Now, the crane driver reported that apparently it weighs 26 tonnes. He was able to weigh it using the crane. And that's pretty much it, just lifted into position. So I'll stop talking now and you can watch what's happening. Now, the actual installation was held up a little bit because there was some clearance issues sort of lifting the bridge onto the centre bearing, but nothing it didn't seem to be anything too dramatic. A little bit of fettling here and there, and it slid on a tree. Now, I'll save all of that story really for the Rother Valley Railway. They can tell that themselves on their own media channels. But at this point, you see the camera angle has changed. I'm now stood on the veranda of a pillbox brake van and got really quite a nice view from up here. Now, if I remember correctly, there's a little train spotting moment coming up. There we go. So that's on the main line, and they're running sort of southwards from sort of London. I think they're probably based in Tunbridge, and they're on their way, I think, to St Leonard's. Anyway, that's the turntable being lifted in. Now, it was shortly after this that my camera battery died, so the final drop, you'll have to we'll leave that to your imagination, or better still, check out the Rother Valley Railway's own website. I'll put a link in the description, and no doubt in the fullness of time there'll be a full description there and lots more detail. And so here it is, sort of finally dropped in position. This still shot shows the lie of the land, as it were. Now currently it's resting on some timber pads, and I believe that they're going to sort of do some final adjustments before building up the perimeter wall, which will be off of that sort of concrete ring beam which you can see. And when all that's done, then it will be the race rail, which is the circular rail that runs around the outside, that will be installed. But all looking really good, and there was mention that it might even be ready to go by May, but I'm not sure if that's achievable or not, but certainly there's lots of ambition there and really nice to see. Now, I mentioned the pillbox brake van, and here it is in all its glory, and I was really thrilled to meet three gentlemen, John, Terry and Simon, and they've been working on restoring this thing, painting it up and sort of getting it in good working order, and they very kindly allowed me to have a little look around it, which is interesting because I'm building one of these. Well, in fact I'm building two, so they showed me round. I got a chance to sit on the guard's chair and have a look out the ducats and have a look at the brake gear and stuff, and it's got a lovely little wood burning stove in, which apparently all works, and they've said I can go back and we'll have a cup of tea on that one day. So that was really interesting, and it was really nice to meet those gents too, and especially so Simon, who was the gentleman who restored the clock at Bexhill West. So very interesting to make that connection. Really wonderful day out. And so we come to part 2 of today's video, and really this is all an experiment, and you'll see what it's all about in just a minute. But what I needed for my experiment was 3 buffer stops. Now I need South Eastern and Chatham Railway buffer stops, and I got hold of a drawing and I thought I'd knock one up quickly, or knock 3 up, using some bits of rail. But the nickel silver rail I found didn't bend that nicely, and I had to keep annealing it, and it was going to take too long. So in the end I had these Great Western Railway style buffer stops, and these are white metal castings, and I thought for the purposes of this little experiment which I'm about to do, I thought they would do the job. So my apologies to all the pedants who are going to pull me up on this, but yes, I know they're the wrong type of buffer stop, but I'm going to kind of South Eastern and Chatham Railway modify them a little bit, and it's really just for the purpose of this video and the experiment that I'm about to describe. So these things were painted up, and I painted a white stripe across the buffer beam itself, just to make it look more the part. But what I was trying to do here was an experiment with lighting. Now I want the lamps that sit on top of these buffer beams to be illuminated, and I know it's probably not really worthwhile, but I want to take photographs of my model when I've finished it, and I'd like to be able to take photographs at night, and I'd particularly like the lamps to be lit. Now I did experiment with using miniature LEDs, but I had a problem with those in that they were just a bit too bright, so I wanted something that was a little bit more subtle. So really this is all about an experiment with some fibre optic cable, but in order for the experiment to sort of work, I needed to kind of mock these things up, sort of like very close to what the final version of this will be, and I'll explain in a little while exactly why I've had to do this. Now here's a little trick. You've seen me do this before. If you've not seen it, or this is new to you, this is quite a good thing to do. I've got a bit of masking tape, stuck it on a bit of wood, a little bit of super glue on the back of it, and then I'm going to take another piece of tape and I'm going to lay it down sticky side up. Now sometimes this can be a tricky thing to do. It sticks to your fingers and lifts off again, but there we go, just about done it. So with that done, what I'm now going to do is put some of the smaller bits and pieces that I'm going to paint up onto the masking tape. That way I've just made a sort of a piece of double-sided tape basically, but it's low tack double-sided tape. So these are little buffer stocks that I drew up and 3D printed. These are pretty close sort of approximation of the Southeastern and Chatham Railway type, and these just had a quick coat of paint. Again, I was not really sort of going for perfection here. I was just trying to do this sort of fairly quickly, but fairly quickly took me quite a while. But anyway, that's done. The paint's nice and thin, and I'm just sort of doshing it on just to get something that looks halfway reasonable. Now these little buffers came out really quite nicely, so I will be using these again in my final version, but for now, there we go, just a quick coat of sort of rusty coloured paint. Now I lost the footage of me gluing these things on, but you can see now in this picture they're mounted on the buffer beam, and what I've got here is a little lamp of the type that sat on the buffer beams at, what do you call that, the buffer stops, the beam of the buffer stop, I don't know. Anyway, these were the type that sat at Bexhill West, and they've got like a dish shape sort of around the lens. And for the lens, what I'm using here is a piece of fibre optic cable. This was just cheap stuff off of eBay, and that threads through the hole. The lamps themselves are 3D printed with a little hole, and this fibre optic cable just pushes through. It can be a bit fiddly, as you can see, but eventually I managed to do it. And what I wanted to see from this experiment was what would the light output be like, and can I disguise the fibre optic cable? Well, that proved to be not too much of a challenge as it happened, so I was quite pleased with that. There you go, you can see the strand of the stuff there. I think that's about 0.4 millimeters thick, or might be 0.5, something like that. Now for the lens itself, I'm just using a flame and just melting back the end of the fibre optic cable there, and you can sort of see as it melts it forms like a mushroom head, and then that's pulling into the lamp and makes quite a nice looking lens. Actually, I wouldn't mind doing that even if these weren't going to be illuminated. I think that's quite a nice way of doing it. So I'll do another one here. And what you have to do if you're going to try this is use the sort of the blue part at the base of the flame. If you sort of use the orange part, you get sort of carbon on the end of the melted part. Now that one went a bit wrong, so I'll just do it again. That's worked out quite nicely. So I've got the three done. The next thing was to install them. And once again, I apologise sincerely for the fact that these are Great Western buffer stops. We really can't have anything with the Great Western influence here at Bexhill West. So here you can see my crude mock-up, and as you can see the fibre optic cable is visible where it leaves the back of the lamp. But please bear in mind here, this is shown on the screen sort of blown up really quite big. From normal viewing distance you really can't see it. Now that ugly masking tape in the background is holding down the stray cable, which is sort of prone to kind of flopping about all over the place. So I've just held it down with a bit of masking tape. But of course eventually that would be covered by the ballast. And this was really why I needed to try this out now to see if it worked. And if I was pleased with it, then I'd make sure I've got the cables in place before I do the ballasting, which could well start in a couple of weeks' time. Whether the final result is effective or not, well, I'll leave you to be the judge of that. It certainly, to my mind, it looks quite nice and quite effective, not too bright, and quite directional as well. These lamps, you wouldn't really have seen much of a glow from an angle, but when you look down the track, it looks pretty good. Now it's really difficult to take a photograph of with the lighting setup I've got here. It's either too dark or too light, and if I put my mobile phone in to get a nice picture of it, the phone sensor tends to sort of amplify the light and make them look brighter than they actually are. But I think all told it's been quite a useful little experiment, and I think I'm going to proceed with this. So then, that's all we've got time for today. I'd like to thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheerio!